Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sarah Maxim, the Vice Chair of the Center for Southeast Asia Studies at UC Berkeley, and one of the organizers of today's talk by Imam Sahib Web. We are very excited to have Imam Sahib here today, all the way from Egypt in this beautiful weather. And we'll be inviting him to start his remarks shortly. Before we begin, though, I would like to very much thank our co-sponsor, the Center for Islamic Studies here at GTU, and under the direction of Professor Munir Jiwa, for hosting this event in this wonderful space. Professor Jiwa will be moderating the talk today, but before I turn things over to him, I wanted to explain a bit more about our overall program, of which this talk today is a part. This talk is being presented as part of a year-long program under the theme Islam Today, New Media and Youth Culture in the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. It is organized by the Centers for Middle Eastern Studies, South Asian Studies, and Southeast Asian Studies at UC Berkeley, with funding support from the Social Science Research Council in New York. Our main goal of this program is to bring forward for public discussion some of the themes and ideas animating how Muslims around the world are using new media to explore their identities, find communities, promote new agendas, and confront stereotypes. Our first event in this program was held this past October and looked at the role of new media and politics in the Muslim world. Today's event and a panel discussion that will be held tomorrow in San Francisco are planned with the intent to provide insights into the role of online worlds and online networking for Muslims around the world. For those of you interested in the discussion tomorrow, the large poster outside details the schedule and list of speakers. Imam Sahib will be speaking there tomorrow as well. And the discussion will conclude with remarks by Shahid Aminullah, the co-founder of altmuslim.com, and Monis Rahman, the CEO of Nasib.com, the online matchmaking site. As an additional note, our final event in our Islam Today program will be a mini arts and culture festival that will be held next month in April in Berkeley, on the Berkeley campus, featuring an art exhibit, film screenings, and discussions with filmmakers from the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and a stage reading of Wajahat Ali's new play, The Domestic Crusaders. If you want more information about the April events, which are still kind of in the process of being planned, or if you're interested in the webcast from the forum we held last October, you can look at our website, which is islamtoday.berkeley.edu. Now, as I'll turn things over shortly to Munir, I'd just like to thank him very much for his participation and support for this program. His involvement has been extremely valuable to us, not least for the intellectual perspective he has brought to this endeavor, and we hope this collaboration will continue into the future. Munir's own background is in anthropology with a PhD from Columbia, and his research looked at Muslim identities in the U.S., so I think his interests and insights will be very relevant for today's discussion. Before Munir steps up, though, I'd like to introduce our supreme host for today's event, Dr. Jim Donahue, the president of GTU, who would just like to welcome everyone to the discussion. Thank you.
I have to be very careful about using those terms in an academic and a theological environment. Welcome. I really appreciate the fact that you're here, and I want to let you in on a little secret to begin with. You notice that the blinds are closed. This is for your benefit, because when you're standing up here and those blinds are open, people are looking out at the bay, they're daydreaming, they're doing all kinds of things, so the attention span is typically not on you. So we have closed them so they'll make sure that I'm sure that what you're going to have to say is going to be keep attention, but just to be sure. We are delighted to be co-sponsoring this with the Centers for South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle Eastern Studies Center at UC Berkeley. And the collaboration with the GTU and the Center for Islamic Studies is just something that we are very, very proud of and very interested in continuing, because as you all know today, that one doesn't do academic scholarship or intellectual work or community work in isolation from one's obvious collaborative partners. And this is something that we believe very firmly here at the GTU, and certainly it's at the cornerstone of the mission of the Center for Islamic Studies. The center is hardly 2 years old, but has been one of our great success stories. under Munir's leadership, we have really begun to develop not only an academic center where intellectual work and academic work and courses and talks and research goes on, but also we want to, and we're very committed to reaching out to the communities of the Bay Area, the Muslim communities, the Christian communities, the Jewish communities, the religious communities of all types, because that is at the core of what the Graduate Theological Union is, what we were created to do back when we were first founded almost 50 years ago, is to collaborate, is to work across differences, across distinctions, across boundaries. And we do this very, very well and very enthusiastically. And the work of today's talk, today's collaboration is really an example of that. So for those of you who are here for the first time, please come home, come back here, and enjoy who we are and what we do. This is an incredible research library that we invite you to partake in. It was actually voted in the East Bay Express to be one of the best places to study in all of the East Bay for both not just graduate students, but for undergraduates as well. So it's a beautiful building, and we welcome you to be here. So thank you for coming, welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to the very capable leadership of Munir Jiwa, who has just been a true gift to the Graduate Theological Union, to the Bay Area, and to all of us that are interested in the work that we're doing today. So Munir, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace to you all. Welcome. Thank you, Sarah, Maxims, and Sanchita, and the Centers for Southeast Asia, and Middle Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley, and other co-sponsors, altmuslim.com, Asia Society of Northern California, and the Arab Cultural and Community Center. Thank you, Jim Donahue, for your warm welcome. I won't take up too much more of your time, but I want to welcome you all, and I'm grateful for you all being here. For the newcomers, please come back. I hope this space is enticing enough to keep you coming. And for those who are regulars, I'm glad to see you all again. And for the students in several of our classes, the Madrasa Midrasha class on Jewish Islamic text study that runs on Tuesday nights, welcome to the Pluralism in Islam class and others. I am so delighted to also share with you the Center for Islamic Studies is in its third year, and we have just launched our master's and MA in Islamic Studies, which should be kind of up, hot and running next week. You'll see it on our website, and we're welcoming you to look at our program, apply. We have a huge sort of number of courses we've added, and what I really appreciate about this collaboration is that one of our goals through this program, through the Center for Islamic Studies, is to really look at the kind of intersections and cross-sections between where religion meets the world. And we kind of take that really seriously, both in terms of our scholarship, but also our outreach to various Muslim and other religious communities. So our focus is where kind of theology meets culture, education, and media. And these are sort of our areas of emphases alongside other areas which are philosophy and ethics and spirituality. So these are sort of areas in which we've developed a whole host of courses and programs, and we sort of continue our commitment to this. I was especially delighted also because media is sort of my area of focus, and I worked on with Muslim artists for my PhD work. So it was, when I saw this title, I was just completely caught and taken in by it. And no less, of course, Imam Sahib Web, who I've look up to as a mentor, and whose writings and preaching is and teaching is just is unmatched. It's really a humbling experience to be here in his presence, and so I want to, without further ado, introduce him. For those of you who don't know him, I'm sure many of you have seen him, heard him and seen him online as well. Imam Sahib Web is an American Muslim activist and scholar, born William Webb in 1972 in Oklahoma. In his late teens, he experienced a 3-year period of exposure to Islam through local Muslim acquaintances and became a Muslim in 1992 at the age of 20 and took the name Sahib. He studied at the University of Central Oklahoma, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in education. He currently studies in Cairo at Al-Azhar University in the College of Islamic Law and completed his memorization of the Quran. Some of us can barely get to a few verses, so to be a hafiz is really an honor, and alhamdulillah, praise God. Additionally, he is in charge of the English translation department of the Dar al-Ifta al-Masriya and is currently training as a mufti and working on an MA in Islamic law. For those of us who have online acquaintance with Imam Sahib, he entered the blog world early on and describes a blog as a bridge between the idealized notions of theology and the realities of everyday life, a place where the convent meets Times Square and the clergy meets the masses. And you can check out his website, sahibweb.com. So without further ado, please welcome Imam Sahib.
It's a pleasure to be here. I landed last night from Cairo. When I landed in JFK, everybody was happy but me. And I told them I still have 6 hours in front of me. And when I landed, actually I forgot about the SIM card problem. So my phone, my beautiful iPhone, I think it's like a new organ of my body, my iPhone. If I lose it, I feel like I really lost something. Didn't work. So when I landed, I was supposed to call the limousine service, UC Berkeley, mashallah. And unfortunately, I couldn't do it. So I took a cab. There's a reason for this story. Nothing's an accident. So when I got in the cab, and I brought a lot of books back. Those of you who studied overseas, you know, when you buy a book, you buy it like 5 times because when you want to mail it back, unless you're tenured and you can use your university to send books for you, you're in trouble. So I got in the taxi, and really nice taxi driver, and I went to Cupertino. I'm actually living in the Bay, so I have my cars in Cupertino. I got my car and came here. And then he asked me, why are you here? You know, why did you come from Cairo? And I was like, well, I'm here to speak at a conference about Islam and Muslims. And of course, I don't look like you're, you know, the adversary of Rambo at all. And he was like, you're a Muslim? And I said, yeah, I'm a Muslim. And then he's like, oh, so that's why you're in Egypt and Cairo? And I was like, yeah. And then he said, you know, you guys are, I'm going to use maybe language that might shock you. He's like, you guys are getting screwed. So I said, why? He said, everybody thinks you guys are terrorists. And I was like, really? He's like, he said, everyone thinks you're terrorists, but you're not terrorists. And then he said, in fact, there's only a small percentage of you guys who are terrorists. And then he named a certain group within the Muslim world that I wouldn't want to mention. Just, I don't want to get in trouble. And he said the Wahhabis. So he said, you know, you're not Wahhabis. So I said to him, I'm just quoting him. So I said to him, how do you know that? And he's like, I watch PBS. So I thought that was a good segue for Islamic media. And whether he was right or wrong, the fact that he has built certain constructs based on what he's seen through communication. In Arabic, the word bayan means to communicate, and a great scholar of Arabic language, Imam Ibn Mundir, he was from Africa. Actually, he lived in Egypt. He says in his beautiful dictionary, Lisan al-Arab, that the word bayan actually in Arabic means to separate two things. The original meaning of the word is to separate. So in the Quran, God says, Allamahu al-bayan, that God taught man the ability to express himself. So he notes that this means that actually man is different from other creation because of his ability to interact and communicate at such a high level. هو يتميز عن غيره بهذا, which means that the person is distinguished, human beings are distinguished by their ability to speak and communicate. And also in the Quran, clearly says, and from the signs of God, from the signs of your Lord, are the ikhtilaf al-sinatihim, the differences in people's language. So communication is valued, and it's an important means for us to build relationships with each other and understanding. And really, just living in Egypt for 7 years and being able to look back towards the West from kind of a different set of lenses, and then coming back here and looking back at Egypt through lenses of the West, communication and sharing of ideas is crucial, I personally believe. And I would like to thank UC Berkeley for having this program and the 3 centers. I'm not going to make any mistakes on saying which centers, but the GTU, I'll just say that, and Nadia Hussein, her name wasn't mentioned, but she was constantly sending me emails, and everyone involved, and Munir, thank you for this opportunity. My conversion to Islam, and don't get scared, is really interwoven into my experience on the blogosphere. I converted in 1992. I was a hip hop DJ. I used to throw down with Pete Rock and DJ Premier, Primo, and all of these other old school artists that none of you probably have ever heard of. Although Guru is in the hospital, may Allah, cure him. And my first sheikh was Rakim, and Public Enemy, and X-Clan, and Paris, a local artist, if you know who Paris is, Sonic Jihad, and other artists. And at a young age, being exposed to groups like Public Enemy and having that hamasa of being a young person, not Hamas, hamasa, ultimately led me at the age of 20, my freshman year in college. It was either Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is African American fraternity. I was about to cross the burning sands or become Muslim, and I became Muslim. On becoming Muslim, I would have to be honest and admit that my early Islam was filled with a lot of idealized notions about what it meant to be Muslim. And then being a white male in Oklahoma, there weren't a lot of examples of Muslims from Oklahoma who the grandparents were farmers. My grandfather had a ranch with cows in Tonkawa, Oklahoma. There wasn't much of an example to follow in the spirit of Vygotsky or Piaget. There wasn't much of a modeling. Will Rogers didn't really do it, and neither did Mickey Mantle. So not really having an example, and this is mentioned in the Quran that the Prophet is a qudwa, is an example for people to see. So my Islam early was based on the books of Sayyid Qutb. Again, don't run out of the room. Who I feel is not dealt with justly at times. People like Maududi, even some of the works maybe of Khomeini, coming out of the hip hop community into maybe an immortal technique kind of understanding of Islam, social justice causes. As a freshman in college, the cusp of your life where you think you know everything, and then when you hit 37, you realize you didn't know anything. And really practicing Islam in the shade of modernity, almost with a sense of fascism. And I'll be honest about that. A very intolerant understanding of Islam. And when that was combined with some of the neo-Salafist trends that we find in the Muslim world, as well as America, and then in the light of not being able to validate my Islam as a white American. And Dr. Sherman Jackson, who is one of my mentors, talks about the reality that many converts who convert to Islam in America have to validate their Islam by adopting another culture. So you would have found me at that time on campus wearing like a Bonanza Shawar kameez, a thobe from Saudi Arabia, having a stick in my pocket. My beads would have been out, oils that smelled, we're not going to go there, and so on and so forth, and really confused in a lot of areas as to how to maintain William Webb, who I still go by the name, doesn't bother me. My mother is not calling me Suhaib, okay? And then knowing what I know now, I would have not been Suhaib. I would have stayed William. But at that time, feeling uncomfortable and not really able to validate being an American Muslim led me to become somewhat of a, as my mother likes to call me, a prima donna or an ideologue. Ultimately, what happened was, as I got older, as I finished school, and as I became a teacher, I started to realize that this is not going to work for me spiritually. I'm hitting lows. I'm not, because, converting to Islam is like using drugs or to any religion. When you convert, you get high for a minute, but it's going to come down, okay? So coming down and having to deal with, the people that I had grown up with my whole life, seeing their reaction to what had happened to me, my own parents, and then my interaction with my professors on campus, and then studying with a profound teacher from Senegal, West Africa, for almost 10 years in Oklahoma. It's actually where I memorized the Quran. 27 parts of Quran were not memorized in Egypt, were memorized in the land of the Sooners. And realizing that in order to authenticate my Islam, I need to learn Islam. And that caused me to study with him and then ultimately head to Egypt with my family in 2004 in Cairo, where I entered in Al-Azhar University, thinking at that time that I would find the answers to the American Muslims' problems in Al-Azhar. So going there again with some romanticized notions, the Malik Shabazz kind of towards Mecca, everything was fine, and so on and so forth. In 2004, when I left the Bay, I knew that I could not come back in Egyptian. Not just because of my physical presence, but I knew that the shoe that fits Egyptian culture is not the shoe that's going to work in American culture. I was old enough to understand that. And I had a friend of mine actually who went here to Berkeley, who went to Mauritania. And he asked me, 2003, 2002, what advice do you give me? And I said, if you come back in Mauritania, we're going to have to go in the parking lot and take care of business. We're going to have to go outside and do some mixed martial arts. Because I started to see within the American Muslim community a lot of divisions that disturbed me. That the term practicing, non-practicing, I find it rather offensive. Such and such person is practicing, such and such person is not. I like to tease our community and say we have more flavors than Ben and Jerry's, or Barnes and Baskin Robbins. It's good to have flavors, but we should learn to respect those flavors. So going to Egypt, and those of you who have been to Egypt, that's the gumbo of the Muslim world. You'll find, Sufis dancing in the mosque. You'll find very, very stringent Wahhabi Muslims who, there's nothing in the mosque. You'll find, people like Haifa Wahbi, who's of course from Lebanon, but welcome to Egypt, and Shakira and Beyonce, who was recently there, and 50 Cent is going to be there this week or next week. And then you'll find on the other end, the history of Kulthum and the poetry of Shawki. Everything's in Egypt, from Sami Yusuf to Def Leppard. So I chose to go to Egypt for that reason, and I chose to come back to the States every year instead of staying in the Muslim world, just to make sure that I would not lose touch. That was really my main purpose. In 2004, a friend of mine, Yusuf Rios, who lives in Ohio now, he also studied in Egypt for 6 years, a Puerto Rican Muslim convert, told me, you should start a blog. So I told him, what on earth is a blog? And he said, it's incredible. It's just like, and he's a philosopher. He's like, post-modernity, mass communications, it's explosions, symbology. It's like, look, I'm from Oklahoma, okay? Just keep it easy. Why do I want to open a blog? And he's like, you'll be able to maintain a feel with Western Muslims. You'll be able to somehow stay in touch with what's going on in the West. And he was like, I warn you, don't let that happen. Don't go back in Egyptian. So he was a very, really instrumental person in starting a blog, which started in 2004 as The Translators. And we called that blog The Translators because my idea at that time was that Islamic tradition has the answers to our problems in the West. So simply what we need to do is just regurgitate what's found in classical books, translate that into English, and everything's gonna be fine. And I'll be honest with you, that was, at that time of my life, my understanding. As we continued to do that, what we realized in 2004, 2005, myself, him, and here we have Brother Zubair Khan, who also the guts and the brains of the website, is that we are not going to be able to authenticate ourselves with anything except being American Muslims. That was kind of the conclusion that we came to. Through our translation of classical text, running into the patriarchy that exists, and I know Muslims don't like to talk about this, within the language of classical text, some of the things that, for example, Imam Dardir, the great Maliki scholar, says in his book Sharh al-Saghir, if I read it to my mother would kill me. Yeah, she would take me outside, and even though I'm 37, she would remind me of the good old days in Oklahoma. And understanding that a lot of those texts might actually hamper the growth of Muslims within America, and the West in particular. So we started to make another move. I guess you could follow our move if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. I'm an education major, so I have to talk about this stuff. We started to kind of head towards synthesis, where we realized that, the tradition is great, And there are certain elements that Muslims are going to have to cling to from the tradition in order to gain authority, but it doesn't have all the answers. Then entering into Azhar University and hearing, not necessarily in the university, but even in the halaqat, or the circles of knowledge outside, which every Muslim in the West, most of them have this dream of sitting in the halaqah with the sheikh, the big beard, and the incense flying across the room. And, wow, I'm like here, I'm like David Carradine, like in the Kung Fu series. And you go through this whole kind of experience. And then you realize, he's talking about buying slave women. They just said that if someone said the Prophet is black, he's not a Muslim anymore. So hitting the wall, so to speak, with those romanticized notions and coming to the conclusion around 2005, 2006, that we have to synthesize things and we have to really present an Islam from our understanding as best we can. I'm not claiming here to have the answers at all. I'm living a life of transition. So who knows where I'll be 10 years from now. But those are conclusions that I made. Those were calls that I made. And started a blog. Actually, it was started by a company that I work for. I would never have called my blog SahibWeb.com. It's kind of bothers me. And there have been discussions about changing the name and taking my picture off the front of the website, but nobody will let me do it. But which was used actually to market some products that we were selling. Mothers of Believers was a series that we sold and so on. And we took over that blog, shut down the translators, and started this concept of synthesis. And what happened was from a period of 2006 till now, our staff has gone from 2 to 60. The number of full-time professional editors are 6 on constantly on call working, and none of them are being paid. One person is being paid. And Ziba, she's here. We interviewed her. We're very happy recently to have her on our website. And my conclusion from the website, as I gave the title, is it's a virtual masjid. And why do I call it a virtual masjid? Is that you will run into people, you will be able to talk about things, you'll be able to address issues that you could never address in the masjid. And that was a struggle, as I go back to my conversion, that I dealt with, ultimately having to come to grips with who I was and maintaining somehow who I was with my Islam. And validating my Islam not through, saying, zindagi ba bandagi shamindagi, but validating my Islam by saying, yo, what's up, man? And being who I was and trying to synthesize that culture into my Islamic articulation, my Islamic expression. So we started, and I remember when we first started, we'd have like 200 hits. We're like, wow, 200 hits a day, like, wow, it's unbelievable. And now anywhere from 2,500 to 3,500 hits a day. If it's something spicy in the community, around 4,000 hits a day. I'll share with you my take on the blog, what are some of the patterns that I've seen over the last 3 years or 4 years. And this year we were lucky, we were blessed and honored to win the Brass Crescent Best Blog of the Year, which I don't know if we really deserve it, but it was a great honor. And we feel honored by that. We hope it will increase us in humility. But when I started the blog, I still had a lot of idealized notions about what it meant to be a Muslim, who I would have respected as a Muslim, and not really dealing with people. So in Azhar, one of my teachers told me something remarkable. He said, the blood of the paper is black and cold, the books that you read. But the blood that you're going to speak to as a clergy is red and warm. It requires love and emotion and mercy. And one of the patterns that I noticed early on is that Muslims in America are not really comfortable being who they are sometimes in front of their fellow Muslim brothers and sisters. And running into questions that would say, I'm sorry for asking. I'm sorry for asking. Excuse me. I hope I'm not disrespecting you. Please don't post this. Don't answer this, even if it's like anonymous. Don't tell anyone I have this problem. Whereas outside of that sphere, maybe even here at UC Berkeley, people would have been much more open in front of non-Muslims than they would have been in front of Muslims. So concluding that there were certain definitions which were kind of inhibiting the growth of Western Muslims about what it means to be religious, what it means to be a dedicated practicing Muslim. And one of the goals that we tried and are trying to accomplish is to expand that definition. Just because of the diversity of the West and the lack of a social religious element that you would find in the Muslim world. And Imam Shatibi, the great Andalusian 8th century scholar, in his book Al-Muwafaqat, he talks about this in detail under, of all chapters, who qualifies to be a witness. Because in classical Islamic law, you have what's called al-adala wal-muru'ah. Is someone, first of all, apt at being a witness? And then secondly, do they follow certain social norms that would not take away from their, quote unquote, orthodox practice? He says very clearly that these definitions have to change over time according to place and situation. And he gives a very funny example. He said, if we were to take the qualifications of a witness that were used in the early century, the first century of Islam, the companions of the Prophet and those who came after them, no one could be a witness now, not even me. And this is a Shatibi. So understanding that religiosity has to change over time, although Muslims will always hold on to certain orthodox principles for sure, as a majority, most definitely, but giving people within, especially the framework of the West, room to breathe. Hasan al-Basri, the great mystic, said, "An-nas la bud min at-tanfis." He said, people have to have a time to kind of rest and relax and take a break. So number one was to try to expand who's welcome to the community. My wife, I lived in Michigan, and my wife would not go to the mosques in Detroit. So I said, did some sister make you mad? Did someone burn the biryani? What happened? She's like, have you seen the sister side of the mosque? I was like, no. She's like, do you know where it is? I was like, I just saw the sign. So she's like, you have to go under a basement. Yeah, through this dark corridor with like dripping water. And then there's this nasty curtain. And that's the sister side. So I was like, okay, cool, pray at the house. Running into people who were religious, who loved God, who were dedicated to Islam, were dedicated to being citizens, but not comfortable in the confines of the masjid. And that's why you'll find a lot of our younger community members, if they make a mistake, they'll say, don't tell Imam Sahib. They could talk to Dr. Phil. They could call, Dr. Ruth a long time ago, but they would feel very uncomfortable. Of course, there might be a natural shame to that. But my feeling was that the first place that people should feel welcome is to the mosque. This is the place of redemption. This is the place where you seek your relationship with God, you articulate your struggles, your mistakes, and no one has the right to come between you in that relationship with the Creator. So I myself felt that as a convert, and that's why I was wearing Bonanza Shawar kamises and saying Apke Hale and Kana Ke Baijan and so on. And then coming to grips with that, ultimately trying to be who I was, and then the fact that I was thrown into the light of an imam, where there's this kind of high set of standards which really no one can live up to. And seeing fellow clergy really border on like nervous breakdowns, just because of the sense of having to be what you're not. And I still struggle with that now, of course. I'm only 37, I'm not that old. But trying to maintain who I was to some degree. So expanding that definition of acceptability. So we started getting questions from homosexual Muslims on the site. And I remember the first few questions that we got, people were shocked. There's gay Muslims? I was like, what do you mean? You think there were gay Muslims? Adulterers, people who've had affairs on their job. Drug usage, jihadists, people who have struggled with Muslim cults, trying to come out of those experiences. And ultimately, trying as best we could, making mistakes, of course, to make them feel kind of welcome. If you look at the Prophet's tradition, You will not find what you see today in many of the Muslim countries, because Muslims, at least in the East, my theory is, have not really come to grips with modernity. Cornel West says that African Americans are born into modernity. White Americans were born into modernity. But in the Muslim world, you still find the dichotomy of racism, although it exists in the West for sure. We have the Tea Party and others, but I'm not at MCA, so I can say that. I'm not at my mosque, I can say that. But in general, struggling with even the concept of human rights, the dignity of human beings, Muslims believe in this, but as a social system, struggling with that. So what we see in many of the Muslim countries are, as I mentioned about my conversion, my humble understanding of this is a very idealized set of notions about what Islam is, how Islam should be articulated. The human face is taken away. The books of Qutb are clung to like they're clinging to oxygen. The idealized notions of certain verses about non-Muslims and even women and Muslims in general are held on to without any respect for the text, the context of that text, or the rhetoric of that text. And as Al-Qarafi, the great jurist, said, يعني جمود على النصوص ضل مضل. Al-Qarafi, the great jurist, said that anyone who clings to these books in such a fashion, this is going to lead people astray, and themselves will also be astray. So coming to deal with the human element that we saw in the time of the Prophet when, as Bukhari, the great hadith scholar, mentions, the drunk man, that one of the companions of the Prophet drunk some Hennessy or drunk some Mad Dog 2020. Even for you to say that in many Muslim communities, you would be charged with, well, this is the white convert, the liberal, and not really a Muslim. He's kind of, he came Muslim, but he's not real Muslim, And even though he went to Azhar, it was like not real Azhar, it was just kind of Azhar. So he memorized the Quran, but it's like Quran for dummies. Not the real Quran. Really? Sounds like the Quran you read. But this is in Bukhari's authentic collection, as Muslims will agree and fight for, that everything in Bukhari is authentic. Okay, here in Bukhari, it's a companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who got drunk. Where is the first place he goes? Is to the Prophet himself. Not to Abu Bakr, or to Umar, to Uthman, or to Betty Ford. The first place he goes is to the Prophet because he trusts the Prophet. Whereas now, we don't have that trust amongst clergy and the others. You have fear. So when I moved to Egypt, my first year, I went to a bank there to open up an account, which is a story, man. Wow. It's an awesome experience. And the woman who was taking care of me, was dressed like she could be on O magazine, the cover of Oprah. And I didn't know she was Muslim. So she said to me, your name's William. How could you be a Muslim? I was like, no, the names is not really important. You have any name, be a Muslim. She's like, no, but William, it's like William Shakespeare. I was like, yeah, Shakespeare. It's like, no, William Web. So ultimately she came to grips that I was a Muslim. And then she's like, how are you a Muslim? Like, how? It's a white man, Muslim. So I was like, well, I would like to tell you the story, but maybe you're not Muslim. I wouldn't want to offend you. She's like, I'm Muslim. I was like, oh, sorry. Then what happened? Yeah, Oklahoma. So then what happened was she said, you know what? Can I ask you a question? I was like, sure. She's like, I can't ask anyone this question. I don't trust anyone. And I was like, what? And she's like, I have doubts about religion. So I was like, everyone has doubts about religion. She's like, no, I'm not. I'm still Muslim. Like, very defensive again. That pattern that I'm talking about of not being able to really let our hair down. Okay, metaphorically, of course, for those of us who might get upset. And telling me, I can trust you because you're a convert and I know you went through the same crap I'm going through right now, basically what you're telling me. I said, really, what's wrong? She said, first of all, am I bad because I doubt? I was like, no. I said, how are you going to come to, Piaget, cognitive dissonance? How are you going to arrive at yaqeen, certainty, if you don't doubt first? So, and then I told her, Allah says, إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّي أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ Ibrahim, he asked God, show me how you cause the dead to come to life. In the Quran, God says to Ibrahim, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ Don't you believe? قال بلى ولكن ليطمئن قلبي. I believe, but I want to strengthen my heart. When I told her this verse, it's like the first time she ever heard this verse before. Then she said, you know what? I'm going to start emailing you questions because I can't ask people. I'm scared of what will happen to me. Not because I'm good or anything, but because I'm the white guy who doesn't look like he's practicing, who's wearing a suit and tie, who comes from America, who became Muslim through doubts. She would feel more comfortable than dealing with clergy. That's the point I want to make. So with our website, and not to also discredit clergy by any means, because there are some Amr Khalid, Sheikh Hamza, have great examples out there. But as a community, not feeling that they can trust religious authority. And that's the first pattern that we've run into through the website, is an absence of respected authority. Because if you look historically, even with the four schools of Sunni Islam, as well as Shia Islam, most of them were implemented through a political enterprise. There was either patronage politically, or there was a military beef behind the military. So Imam Shatibi, he says that no person should make a fatwa that goes against the Maliki madhab in all of Western Africa and Spain. Because that was the law of the land. He was supported. But after the collapse of the Khalifa, but I would say even before that, as many of us know, the collapse of Muslim institutions took shape, I would say even in the 10th century, where if you look at the ijazas, the traditional Muslim licenses that were given, the names of women start to disappear. Obviously something happened. Prior to the 10th century, for example, in Herat, Afghanistan, who would believe that the greatest scholar in Sahih Bukhari was a woman named Fatima in the 7th century in Afghanistan, Hijri. So after the 10th century, you see women start to disappear. Then as you continue up until you get maybe to the time of Muhammad Ali in Cairo, you see that these ijazas become kind of streamlined. The scholarly class becomes well-defined, not open so much to the masses. And ultimately you have a collapse. Azhar taking a major fall in the last 100, 200 years or so. Deoband in India and Pakistan now, by many people as seen as not relevant to their lives to many degrees, especially women, and so on. So people, in their struggle to orient themselves as Muslims, haven't really been able to find authority. And what we discovered after giving people that space, trying to create a space of feeling comfortable with themselves and developing their religious notions. Number two was the fear of not having authority. Not having a marji'iyya, as we say, a reference point. And you throw that in with postmodernity and this Sheikh Wiki, Ibn Google, Ibn Yahoo, as I like to call him, and the exposure to millions of ideas, which is good and bad, but not really being able to understand what might be considered acceptable and what might not be considered acceptable. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean textually or religiously, because as Al-Qarafi, the great Maliki jurist, mentioned, that for anyone to give a religious ruling without taking into consideration the climate and environment that he lives in, this person is a criminal. So just because something's in those classical books, or you find a certain text, or you find a statement of a certain scholar, doesn't necessarily mean that's correct. And that's why we have training. So an absence of authority, kind of a scramble. And in two main areas. Number one, by certain Muslim leadership, the world over, and the West as well, to gain authority. By any means necessary, okay? Number two, the Muslim masses, especially those who are taking part in the blog world, their frustration with that. So for example, I remember once we posted a religious ruling on celebrating the Prophet's birthday, peace be upon him. That was written by the great scholar Abdullah bin Bayya, which basically says, if you want to party, party. If you don't, stay home. And somebody wrote me and said, how come there's no definitive guidance there? Why is Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya not pushing me around and telling me it's like this, it's not like this? Not being used to hearing that kind of discourse. So an absence of authority, and that led to the third trend that I've seen in working in the blogosphere, and that is the danger of the net. And when I'm talking about the danger, I'm talking about certain pseudo-militant jihadist movements which do and are very, very active on the net. And having to engage some of their thoughts and ideas. Anwar Awlaqi is probably one of the best examples in the last 6 months of that. Someone who was a very popular speaker in America one time, obviously took on a different message. And being asked questions that I myself was not sure, should I post this? Because when I land, unlike many of you, the TSA always has a wonderful welcoming committee waiting for me when I land, even though my name is William on my passport, and I'm from Oklahoma. And initially struggling with those problems. Number one, the militancy or the lack of tolerance. So when we posted your article, we didn't put your picture up there because we knew if we put our picture up there, no one would read what you wrote, what we wrote about you. Certain people. And they would make a big issue. Why doesn't Ziba wear hijab? And why is she not covered? Of course, I believe that hijab is an obligation. But that doesn't mean I don't respect her as my sister in Islam. I don't love her as my sister in Islam. I certainly will welcome her in my community, and I'll give her a platform to speak. But there will be other people who would have serious problems with this. And by posting that picture, we knew that they would not benefit from her knowledge, her wisdom, the beauty of her intellect, and what she took on as an American Muslim woman was very important for us to define ourselves as American Muslims. So dealing with that, some questions that I received about voting in the West, participating politically in the West, going to universities, studying with the kuffar. These are the kind of questions that we would receive. The validity of suicide bombings in Israel. A number of questions. The concept, especially amongst convert Muslims, of hijrah, migrating and leaving America, as well as the children of immigrants who are somewhat, and I'm not saying all of them, but some of them are suffering kind of from a psychosis. Am I here or there? You know, when I have a friend, he was born and raised in Kansas, okay, with Dorothy and Toto. So I asked him, hey, where are you from? He's like, I'm from Mbaba. Mbaba is a slum in Cairo. Yeah. So I was like, really? عشت كم يوما هناك? How many days? He's like, Wallah wala yawm. I never lived one day there. So I was like, how are you from Mbaba, bro? You're from Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas. He's like, yeah, you're right. You know, why do I was like, yeah, because you have this kind of orientation issue where you haven't really understood where your ultimate investment is. So we noticed that there was a pattern of converts who were made to feel uncomfortable about being American, or they were sold by some type of self-styled guru who would use the intangibles to intimidate them religiously. So having a dream about seeing the prophet, you know, I had a dream, the prophet came to me and told me I'm better than you. And people saying, you must be better than us then. And using that to the point that some of them ordered them to divorce their wives, to leave them, to forego their children and their responsibilities. The other is the trend of militancy, as I mentioned earlier, that you're born as American, you live in America, so it's almost like it's like original sin. Yeah. And the only way that you're going to be able to overcome that is to leave America and live in the Muslim world. So I had once a guy come to me and tell me, you should migrate to the Muslim lands. This is about 10 years ago. I said, really, where am I going to go? He said, you can go to Yemen. So with all respect to Yemen, yeah, you think I could just go over there and get a job as a teacher with my license from Oklahoma? Like, start teaching right away? He's like, yeah, no problem. You can go there. I was like, no, I don't think they're going to give me citizenship. He's like, okay, then Japan. So I was like, last time I checked, Japan wasn't the home of the Khalifa, man. It's like, no, but they're less kufr than America. So that's something that was used on converts, and I experienced this as a convert, to push them. Sometimes you'll find that the greatest carriers of patriarchy are women. the greatest carriers of extremist Islamic messages could be actually converts, because they are made to feel somewhat guilty about who they are. Number two, the children of immigrants, also for the same reason. So we started to publish articles probably in 2005 and 6 that dealt with the fallacy of hijrah, the ridiculous notion of migrating to a country in mass and expecting that, their economy is going to be able to handle that migration, first of all. But first and foremost, that it is not a religious obligation. 3 of the 4 Islamic schools of thought clearly state that if somebody is qadir, if somebody has the ability to worship God, the basic fundamentals of Islam, then that person does not have to migrate to the land of the Muslims. That's the Shafis, the Hanafis, and the Hanbalis. Imam Malik has a different opinion. Based on the hadith of the Prophet of Fudayk, one of his companions who came to him, and the Prophet told him, establish prayer amongst your people, live amongst them, and stay amongst them. And this hadith is related by Bayhaqi, وَرِجَالُهُ ثِقَاتٍ, with an authentic chain of narration. So trying to save converts from some of the experiences that I went through. Secondly, engaging the children of immigrants to try to encourage them to realize that your ultimate investment is in America, where you live now. Although you should not forget about your parents' homeland by any means, or disrespect the culture that they've given you. But ultimately, your investment is not in Rawalpindi. Your investment is here. And you're American. Your culture is America. You can't deny that. So every year, someone comes to me in Egypt, I get a phone call, Imam Sahib, I need to see you. I meet a brother or a sister somewhere in Egypt who has stomach problems, a fever, they're not feeling very well, and they're like, I came here thinking that I was going back to the land of the Nile to kind of relive this romanticized notion of my grandparents, and I got typhoid, man. Intellectually as well as spiritually. And I said, yeah, because they listen to, they listen to who they listen to. And you listen to the Backstreet Boys, man. It's a whole nother world. It's a whole nother system. So seeing those people come back home. And we started to address the issues of hijrah. We started to address the issues of violent aggression against the innocent. We addressed some of the common misunderstood texts. For example, the Prophet's statement, "Umirtu nuqatil an-nas," I was ordered to fight the people. We tried to address issues of participation in the community. And we tried to address, most importantly, that in order for Muslim Americans to really feel confident and to maintain or fulfill their divine role as members of the community, they're going to have to make their own calls on certain issues. So if you look at our website and other websites, you will find constantly overseas scholars being quoted and referenced, which is important. But very rarely will you find, for example, recently, Sheikh Yasser Qadhi from Yale, who has Muslim Matters, excellent blog, actually took the time to write an article dealing with the concept of the separation of church and state, the Constitution of the United States of America, on his own. And I applaud him for that. Sheikh Abdullah Hamid Ali here at Zaytuna recently wrote an article on scholarly consensus on his own. So now you're seeing that change from just regurgitating the translators, quote unquote, to now this synthesis. And that's something that we try to encourage. We have a staff of around 5 or 6 people, American Muslims who study in Al-Azhar. There are 2, as I know now, 2 or 3 American girls studying in Azhar. One of them from Afghani descent and another from Pakistan or India. We have 3 converts studying in the College of Islamic Law, myself, and trying to keep them involved in dealing with the community. Finally, it's a lot to say, and only one tongue to say it all, right? Feeling that as American Muslims, I'm in a very difficult position, because even with the children of immigrants, I don't really feel comfortable sometimes. And why I say that is, I don't care about the People's Party, Altaf Hussein, MQM, and Benazir Bhutto, may God have mercy on her, and her husband and he got hung in late 70s, or a dad or whoever, and in Egypt, I'm not really concerned about Ahmed Nafis and Ayman Noor and Baroudi's back, and I'm worried about Obama. And running into converts in America, last year, an African-American brother was making 6 figures a year, who has trouble getting married in our community because of the stigma of racism that exists in the Muslim community, comes to me and basically says, I'm lonely. And I was like, I'm lonely too. I'm in a big office, Imam Sahib Web, Azhar, wow. But I told him, he's like, I just want to go out and kick it, I was like, me too. He's like, no, not kick it like, Baluchi dances and stuff. I mean, can I kick it like Q-tip? So I said, yes, you can, for sure. Running into a convert community who in many ways, with all respect, is treated kind of like a handicapped community. We have our own doors, we have our own clubs within the mosque, but you don't find us on the board of any masjids. If you look at Muslim organizations outside, for example, Zaytun and a few others, you will not find Gorasab or converts participating in the actual discourse of the community. But who is more qualified to present Islam to the people of this country? Are the people from this country. So running into that frustration, which is articulated well in Dr. Sherman's book, of brothers and Muslim sisters who come to me. Another person came to me a week later, here in Santa Clara, 6 figures, works for Facebook, brilliant guy, graduated from Stanford, African-American, comes to me, stands on the door of the mosque, my office, and says, am I haram? It's like, are you haram? Haram means forbidden. It's like, dhatan, aw libasan, aw sha'ran. What way are you haram? He said, no, like totality, like in my totality, do you see anything haram with me? So I was like, not really. I like, actually, where'd you get them shoes from? Good shoes. He said, got a sale, I said, sit down, what's wrong with you? The brother was visibly upset. He said, when I go to the mosque, people constantly come and complain about how I'm dressed. I was like, okay, look, I'm gonna write this down for you. Carry this in your pocket. Imam Sahib Web said, I'm not haram. Put that in your wallet. But can you imagine how, we're not used to regulatory religion. And that's something that we struggle with. But even the Prophet taught us how to be wise when we deal with people. So a convert community that needs room to breathe and grow and make mistakes. A sister contacted me from a state who just converted to Islam, and she was upset on the phone. And I asked her, what was the problem? And she said, I left Jummah prayer and I took off my hijab. I just became Muslim. If I wear hijab at home, my mother and father are going to go crazy. That's a reality. If my relatives see me in the street with hijab on, things get ugly. And Imam, I'm struggling. You don't have to tell me I'm doing something wrong. I know it. But I got issues. The law is one thing and practicing it is another. She said, but when I leave the masjid, even with the hijab on, a man pulls up next to me and says, I just want to let you know that you're dressed improperly, and pulls off. That's not going to fly here, man. Although your intentions are great and you have an obligation, if you have knowledge, to teach the people. But dealing with that convert component, a community that's kind of misplaced, although 50% of American Muslims are converts, don't really have a voice, being a place where they can kind of come and vent a little bit and let some steam off, if you will, and express some of their frustrations. Now that, I see a lot of brothers and sisters here who are obviously not, the children of people from Oklahoma. And I'm saying this and they're going, because that also applies to them. But as a convert, struggling with that. And also struggling not to be anyone's poster boy, the great white hope. It's not going to happen. So those are things that we struggled with, that we felt in the blogosphere. Number one, expanding an acceptable feeling for people to be part of the community, which could not happen really in a lot of communities, to be honest with you, just because of cultural baggage as well as some misunderstandings of religious text. trying to expand the maidan or the square of who the community is. And it's very clear, if anyone reads any book on creed in classical tradition, you'll find one of the first principles is that no one is taken out of Islam for a sin they commit. Of course, associating partners with God is the only one. But even there, the person is allowed to repent. Number two, realizing that Al-Azhar is not the answer for America. That the tradition is not the only answer for Muslims in America, but a synthesis. As Dr. Sherman told me when I left to Egypt and started to study with one eye open, brother. Have a filter. Don't come back and regurgitate those classical texts here and expect that to work. Because those classical texts are not holy. Wajahat Ali, one of our dear brothers, he contacted me a few months ago about Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, the land of Islam and the land of war. I told him, Wajahat, that's not found in the Quran, it's not found in the Sunnah. It has nothing to do with revelation. That's a political theory that was put together by a student of Abu Hanifa, Shaybani, who basically was acting as the Huntington of his age. Instead of the clash of civilizations, he was asked to describe the political climate of the Muslim world. Harun Rashid asked him, Sif ayyamana hadihi. And he said, Ayyamuna ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, aw daruna. He said, Sif darana. Describe our land and describe their land. He said, Daruna dar al-Islam wa darahum dar al-Harb. That was how this all started. Wajahat was like, what? I said, Wajahat, it's not in Quran, it's not in Sunnah. He said, I never knew this. I had always assumed that this was something that is like binding on us to hold on to. But if you look out through history, Imam Ashashi, the great Muslim legal theorist, at the end of his lifetime, he says that, this division is good, but it doesn't fit our days. And he took that stance and said, this is the land of Islam. This is the people who are not Muslims. That's how we'll divide these lands. So dealing with that. Number three, the collapse of authority. That Muslims till now don't have, and clergy sometimes assume, Bernard Weiss says in The Spirit of Islam, that contemporary Muslim scholarship builds its authority by being retroactive. So they'll kind of like relive the experiences of Ibn Taymiyyah with the philosophers, and Al-Ghazali, with the philosophers, and Ahmed ibn Hanbal with the Mu'tazilites, and Ibn Abbas with the Khawarij, and gain some kind of authoritative feeling from that. But if you were to go to most young Muslims in Egypt and ask them, do you know who Qadi Abdul Jabbar al-Mu'tazili was? Like, who? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from the Lakers? It's like, no. Qadi Abdul Jabbar al-Mu'tazili wrote a book in Usul al-Fiqh. It's one of the greatest books ever written. Like, I don't know who you're talking about. And once in a cab in Egypt, this happened to me. A young man, he asked me a question, and I said, let me ask you a question. He said, yeah. I said, do you know who Abdurrahman al-Suyuti is? Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. He said, yeah, he gives the khutbah in Zamalek on Fridays. I was like, no. He died 9/11 after Hijri, bro. Then I was like, do you know who Nancy Agram is? Oh, wasafaha wasan taman. And then I asked him, why do you like Amr Khalid? Why don't you like us, the dudes with the red hats? Why when we show up, you guys flee? But when Amr Khalid comes, Amr Khalid, God bless him, if he gives a speech in Cairo, 15,000 people go. I mean, it's incredible. It's like, it's a sight to see the whole city just kind of moving towards Sit October where he gives his talks. He said because he speaks the language of the youth. We understand what he says. But when you guys talk, لغة المشايخ لا تفهم. It's like that language is not understood. So the same thing here in America. We cannot regurgitate those very difficult texts like the Mukhtasar, for example, of Ibn Hajib in Usul al-Fiqh. How many people in the world now can understand that text? And then I'm telling you, in order to be a good Muslim, you have to master this tradition, which for, I would say, 90% of the Muslim world is not understandable. That's not going to work. Number four, dealing within that absence of authority with a plethora of thoughts and problems and ideas, which honestly I haven't written for my own blog in probably 3 months, just because it's overwhelming. It's almost impossible to handle the number of questions, inquiries, problems, and also good things that we see. Muslims contacting us, for example, a young doctor studied in the University of Michigan who actually wrote an article, but went to Jamaica, contacted, said, look, I'm volunteering in this village in Jamaica to help these young people. There's a lot of very good stories. Aziba was a very wonderful story. Bilqis Abdul Qadir, if you know, the great basketball player. Wonderful story. But it's just massive issues which are related to being exposed to 1,000 different ideas and having an absence of authority. The fourth that I talked about is the converts, kind of like the prodigal son, so to speak, but still not having come home yet. Yeah, struggling really to find a place of orientation and rest, and trying to create an understanding that ultimately maintaining your Americanness and maintaining your position and place in society and synthesizing that with your religion is really your ultimate challenge. And that's very difficult for people to realize, myself included. And I really went through that problem. And finally, encouraging the children of immigrants to, because they have a lot of problems, you know. We were talking today earlier how, you know, the marriage issue for any single young girl, you know, if you're talented or if you're well-spoken or if you're in the community, you know, the aunties are going to be on you like white on rice, basically. And as well as the brothers struggling to get married, struggling to live up to certain cultural constructs which are almost impossible to replicate in America, and allowing them kind of have some space. What I think, or where I think we're headed is a good question. As I finish, I would say number one is that authority is going to be earned, but not forced. And we're seeing that pattern in the Middle East, where the person who is not traditionally a scholar, people tend to follow them more. So I gave the example of Amr Khalid. There's another very bright, up-and-coming young scholar named Mustafa Husni, who gives lectures every Tuesday in Heliopolis, attracting around 5,000 people under the age of 30, having a really big impact. Number two, I think we're going to see a more gender-balanced effort. In the Sharia college in Cairo now, we have, I believe, around 15,000 girls graduating every year. So over time, these people, they talk, yeah. They write, they talk. In fact, today we published an article on our website by one of those graduates who speaks English. She's applying for a Fulbright, so if anyone knows any connections, you can talk to me. Sister Najah, an Egyptian girl who graduated from Al-Azhar. She's bilingual. And, you know, her article today that I read is a very profound article on differences in Islamic law. So I think you're going to start to see that, especially here in America, that sisters have a lot of questions, and really the absence of scholarship for them is profound. It's malnourished. And I think Zaytuna here is doing a good job of trying to address that, as well as other organizations on Maghrib is doing a good job of that. But creating a climate where women can actually engage in scholarship. One thing that I would hope to do when I move back to the Bay and to America is to ordain imams and to create a battery of exams that would not only be for men, but also for women, that would allow people to have faith in the intellectual credibility of their clerics. And one of the requirements for that exam would definitely be a popular culture battery of questions. And I'm dead serious. You know, 50 cent is not change, bling bling is not silverware. And understanding who you're talking to as an imam and being relevant to young people and to the community is very important. And not forcing anyone to be ordained, but to let people feel comfortable with scholarship in their community, adding also a psychological component to that, counseling component, as well as a battery of exams that would not focus on one aspect of the tradition, but would include even Shia Islam, so that now you have a well-grounded cleric who exhibits the maturity to respect, even though he might not agree. I can disagree with you, but I can respect you with certain traditions, but but he's literate or she's literate of those things. That's something that I myself would like to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years, that there would be kind of a battery of exams that could be offered, not forced upon anyone, to those people who claim the mantle of clergy within the American Muslim community, that would not only test their ability to understand Islamic issues, but cultural issues, historical issues. I was in Al-Azhar, one of the best things I've learned, training with a mufti now who is in America, Dr. Muhammad Wissam, is when he would call me and say, I got a question from America, but I'm missing something. Can I ask you a few questions? And the questions that he would ask are strictly cultural. You know, the Islamic atheist, he's a mufti. He's one of the top students of Dr. Ali Juma. He has everything memorized. He memorized the Quran when he was probably 6. But not knowing who he's dealing with in the West. So I remember we had a question from a convert in New York City who said, I'm scared to wear hijab. If I wear hijab, I don't know what's going to happen because I'm in New York City and there's no mosques. She just converted. So I told him, Sheikh, we have like 600 mosques in New York City. I don't think she's been around very much. Maybe she converted like Barnes & Noble or something. Sheikh Barnes doesn't have a mosque, but maybe Sheikh Noble does. And then telling him that and him saying, oh, okay, so there's like, you know, in America you have mosques? I was like, yeah, we have a lot. And we have schools and Quran schools. Like you can walk outside with hijab on, no one hurts you. He's like, well, he didn't know that. And I said, Sheikh, I want to show you something. So I showed him the speech of M.L. King, I've been to the mountaintop. So he understands English. So he was watching Martin Luther King and I said, Sheikh, do you know who that is? He said, I have no idea, but his language is unbelievable. I said, Sheikh, that's one of the most important historical figures in America the last like 60 years. He's like, you know what I want you to do, Suhaib? Because he came to me one day and he said, Ana ams shahidtu filman ajiban. Ismuhu The Scent of the Woman. So I met him one day. He told me I saw a film last night called The Scent of the Woman. And I was using torrents. I said, hey, Sheikh, Scent of the Woman is one thing, but torrents is another, Sheikh. You know, I was like, so are you saying torrents are halal? He's like, don't write that down. But then he told me, I asked him, Sheikh, why are you watching The Scent of the Woman? He said, I'm going to America. I was like, shouldn't you watch Coming to America with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall? But the Sheikh told me something that was profound. He said, I need to try to understand that place. I said, you're not going to do watching The Scent of the Woman, Sheikh. Although you might get a little something, but your wife is going to get mad at you, Sheikh. But working there and him constantly calling me and training me also, but realizing that most of his questions are about us, cultural issues. And him telling me, you guys are lucky because you live there. You have this and you have that. I don't have that. And I have that problem in Egypt. When Egyptians come to me and ask questions, I'm in the dark, smoke and mirrors. I can give you the answer from Al-Mughni of Ibn Qudama, but I don't know the cultural nuances that exist here. So realizing, I would say at the end, that American Muslims, in all of their greatness and all of their struggles, whether it's the Salafis, whether it's the Sufis, whether it's Sheikh Hamza, whether it's Sheikh Yasser, whether it's Dr. Sherman Jackson, even someone like Dr. Tariq Ramadan, Jamal Badawi, the GTU, this effort is all really an effort to synthesize that expression as American Muslims, to come to grips with being comfortable. And I think this is a great platform to work towards that. And I ask, God to bless this effort and to bless everyone here. And I thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Yeah, good, man.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you, Imam Sahib. We're going to open it up for a Q&A. If you can keep your comments brief and pose it as a question, and maybe I'll take the liberty of just a few reflections first. One of the things that, out of the many things you spoke about, a few that just kind of came to mind in terms of thinking about what online communities do and what they enable, and what a virtual community does that doesn't, that's not always possible in sort of real communities, but there's a sense that what is real and imagined and what is public and private is all sort of blurred when we're talking about kind of virtual worlds, including what is local and global. And when you talked about language, I thought it was interesting. It's not just a kind of a cultural translation that needs to happen or a religious translation, but there's also questions around, the languages that prevail. So when you talk about American Islam or Muslims in America or American Muslims, perhaps, English becomes that language, and perhaps even more so than Arabic. But on that note, I wanted to maybe probe this as a kind of or raise a sort of problematic as I see it. One of the things is this possibility of interpreting what you have shared with us so brilliantly is this, the way in which Muslims are kind of created into good Muslims and bad Muslims. Good Muslims being the American Muslims and sort of bad Muslims everywhere else. And I wonder if there's a sense as Muslims kind of come to deal with their Americanness, if there's a larger process in America where Muslims who are here get to be the good Muslims, and sort of Muslims all sort of in the world are the bad ones. And so I wonder if you could maybe address this issue, and then also how American Muslims get mobilized into, again, being the spokespeople for the Ummah. Then the opposite is that many Muslims feel themselves to be global citizens, and in fact always have to prove their patriotism in this country. So there's a fine line between claiming your Americanness and having to perform Americanness to be the patriotic Muslim or a patriotic citizen, which others actually don't have to do. Non-Muslims don't get to do that. So there's both this fine line between how much of your Americanness you can claim as a Muslim, without feeding into this whole idea about being, the good patriot, because that rhetoric is certainly, and in fact, we're trying to push Muslims to make sure that they're as global as any time before. So it's just the idea is that to be a person in this world is to be, to have this kind of consciousness of a global citizen. So I just want to raise that as a question of how the good Muslim, bad Muslim gets mobilized in the rhetoric of claiming Americanness as an identity, and then we can open it up to the audience as well. So thank you. Can I just, make an announcement? For those who might want to pray Maghrib, you're welcome to use the next room or outside as well.
One of the issues that I wanted to speak about, is good you reminded me, is that American Muslims are constantly forced to answer or speak on behalf of global Muslims. To the extent that if you find, for example, Dr. Hatem Bazian, I believe was on Bill O'Reilly's show, Sheikh Bill, a few years back. And the first question I believe he asked him was about the Palestinian crisis and the idea of suicide bombers and terrorism. And Hatem answered brilliantly when he said, why are you trying to define me through that? Why don't you define me as an associate professor, UC Berkeley, someone who started the Qalam Institute? So one of the struggles that we have to deal with often, especially I can say that from a convert perspective, is that we have to separate ourselves from being spokesmen for the rest of the world. I'm not responsible for what happens in the rest of the world. My circle of influence is very small. I have 2 kids and that's about it. And even that sometimes gets challenged. But having to speak on behalf or validate or invalidate the actions of people that I have no relation, I have never met them. I remember once I landed in LA and our friends at the TSA, who are nice people, they're nice people, one of them asking me, do you know Osama? So I was kind of shocked, like, how would I meet Osama? One day I was in Marcy Avenue in Brooklyn and I was having a halal coney dog and I met Osama? Where did I meet Osama? And the question was put to me as though I really had knowledge or an ability to know anything about someone who lives in a cave. And I was offended, not because of the association of terrorism. I mean, that's what they have to do. But why would you expect me to speak on behalf of, I know more about Bob Stoops, the head coach of the Oklahoma Sooners, than I do about Osama bin Laden. So one of the challenges that we've had is, and you mentioned it, is to define ourselves as American Muslims and to stake our claim in that and to answer to that and to be responsible for that. But at the same time, we cannot demonize the Muslims in the East. And what I'm referring to are the orthodox, broad community of Muslims, not terrorist organizations, people who are killing the innocent. Anything that's going to violate American law, we obviously have to speak to it as a community because we live in America. Yeah. But outside of that, their countries and their problems are their problems and their countries. We've seen that you cannot build democracy with an army, and how are we going to be able to do it from here as Muslim speakers? It would be very difficult. So I would say, number one, we have to present ourselves as a community that's concerned about America. And not just from the point of rhetoric, without appearing to drink too much of the Kool-Aid. And I guess that's what you were alluding to about patriotism. But also, if there are Muslims who want to drink Kool-Aid, let them drink Kool-Aid. Because that's part of our community. There's Muslims who don't want to vote, that's your business. But we cannot force a strict set of definitions on our community. We'll create trouble and problems. So the question is a good question, but ultimately it's going to be very difficult to just give a definition. We're a very broad community, a very different community. I mean, all of us know how many masajid, how many mosques are in Oakland, and how different are they? Very different communities, just in Oakland itself. So creating a very specific set of definitions is problematic, and that's why Ash-Shatibi, who I constantly quote, a remarkable scholar, talks about the concept of Islamic universals, the maqasid al-kulliyya, where we define ourselves through these universals, and where actually Islamic law left the particulars to culture and society. So, for example, in the Quran, God talks about the rights of the woman who's married to a man through a legitimate contract. One of them is called nafaqah, which is he has to spend on her. But the Quran does not define in clear terms nafaqah. It does not say, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ishtaru al-wardah, and oh, you who believe, go buy roses. Wa'ti biha ila azwajikum, dhalikum khayru lakum in kuntum la ta'lamun. It doesn't say that in the Quran. It leaves it open to culture. So I think also that leadership of the Muslim community and those who are writing, people like Dr. Sherman and others, on Islamic Western theological issues, are going to have to do so in the light of those big particulars. And then when we're addressing our own communities, where we live, not even as a nation, it will be very difficult to define. I mean, look at Northern California. Like I was telling them on the way here, in Northern California, I never saw a McCain sign anywhere. But I went to visit Oklahoma, I didn't see one Obama sign. I mean, really just night and day. So I think particulars are going to have to left to local communities and local scholarship. It will be very difficult to put those particulars and use those as definitions for a whole community. As for patriotism, I think we need to encourage patriotism. I think that, I supported the 11 youth in Irvine. I don't know if you guys are aware. And the reason that I did that, and some people got mad at me, they said, you're a radical. And I was like, so you're telling these 11 young American Muslims that they can't be jihadists, they can't go grab a gun and kill someone, but when it comes to doing something that's as American as apple pie, standing up and protesting is very American. You're going to stop them from that too. Then don't be surprised if they join a jihadist group, because you're suffocating their expression. You might not agree, I might not have agreed with how they did it, but the fact that they're young, that they're brave, they feel expressive, I would much rather them go through this. This is a very American process. And now they're dealing with the authorities. They've created Facebook groups. They're threatening the administration of the university. No offense to anyone here. Other UC senates are voting and supporting them. So they're actually fulfilling the promise of America. That's being part of a process. And that's very patriotic. Whereas if they had gone and harmed someone or participated in some type of unhealthy, violent act, we'd also be censoring them. So we're going to have to give people leeway. And that's something I didn't mention in my talk, and I'll finish, is we're going to have to give each other a lot of room to breathe in America as Muslims. Sahib Web is going to make a lot of mistakes. Yeah. Religious leaders are going to slip. Their followers and communities are going to slip. Giving each other that room to breathe is very important. Because as I said before, in Oklahoma, the only white Muslim I had was Will Rogers and Mickey Mantle. There was no other example set for me there.
Other questions? Comments, reflections, please at the back and then Benita.
I had a question, and towards the end of your speech, you talked about where the community is headed in terms of outreach, and you mentioned that authority needs to be earned, and I think that's really a salient comment. And I think my question is, how can one, as a member of the virtual community, go towards the community, approach the community, and try to re-engage people who maybe are Muslim, were raised Muslim, or converted and gone through the whole entire arc of being overzealous and then dropping it completely. How do we re-engage people who have distanced themselves from what their religion, from their spiritual identity, because of this sort of suffocating experience that you described that's happening to a lot of people within the confines of their home, within the religious authorities that raise them and that brought them up. And then as they grow older, they find themselves going through normal cultural life experiences in colleges, universities, workplaces, and realizing that they have a spiritual identity and trying to put those two together. How can we, as a virtual member in a virtual community where there's distance, where there's a screen that separates you from another person, how can we re-engage people through that? Because as much as I love the computer and I love reading blogs and writing posts and making comments, I know that when I'm impacted by a person, it's because I've been encouraged. That changes everything. The dynamic of being able to stand here and ask you a question and have you answer it is very different than typing a question on the computer screen. And so I'm really interested in, yes, having virtual communities, but also having actual spaces. And when you have sex-segregated spaces like we do in Mosques, I think that really it creates issues when you want to discuss topics that are relevant to this culture, where you have mixed company and so on. I hope that's not too wrong a question.
It's all right. It's good. It's no problem. I think that we have to realize that we're limited in our role and our effect on people online. I mean, I would really hope that, people aren't finding 100% fulfillment through liquid life, But one pattern also that I've noticed by people who are regular is loneliness. So what Zubair here is with me, we tried actually to personally answer things. So using that celebrity status, I don't like to look at it that way, but that, like you said now, and actually answering questions. And that kind of drove me crazy. But trying to actually contact people personally, and then I'll give you an example. And I don't want to emphasize myself because I'm nothing, but just recently in Egypt, I get a message on my phone from a young girl who says, I have 4 bottles of vodka in my house and I got to drink. I was like, definitely you have 4 bottles of vodka. Someone's going to drink it, right? And just developing a relationship with a girl I don't know through messages on my phone. And actually, I put her as Struggler. Her name on my names, her list is Struggler. And contacting him every day and saying, I'm not drinking, I'm going crazy. I'm not drinking. And then realizing that she just needs to hear from someone, don't drink, man. And then getting her, actually building a relationship with her to the point that now I have her in contact with a counselor. But are we able to do that for everybody that we run into? I think that's impossible. And I think that, and this is a pattern that I do see in the Muslim community in America that you should note, is that the importance of national organizations is waning. The idea of Muslims really, Malcolm X was an amazing person, but he's almost a difficult historical figure to deal with, because the converts are all waiting for a Malcolm-esque like figure to take us and lead us to the River Jordan, because we have a lot of Christian theology in our mind as converts. We're still waiting for a Messiah in the Muslim community, not necessarily the theological overturn of a Messiah, but that Malcolm-esque type leader, whether it's Siraj al-Hajj, Imam Hamza, Imam Zayd, and so on and so forth. Cat Stevens even. I think that's impossible now, the diversity of the community. Number two, Muslim immigrant organizations became strong in the 60s and 70s and 80s because there was very few Muslims in America at that time, outside of the indigenous Muslims who were already well organized with the leadership of Imam Wallace, Deen Muhammad, peace be upon him, may Allah have mercy upon him. But as Muslim communities became more diverse and as our numbers started to spread and halal stores started to pop up everywhere, it wasn't a big deal to go to a conference every year. So if you run into like chachas and chachis and uncles and aunties who were like, I remember back in 1960, when it was just like, there was like this one place to pray Jummah. We had to drive like 5 hours. So amazing. And we saw like 5 Muslims there. We've all heard these stories. We would like drive from Tucson to LA to buy halal lamb. So at that time, it meant something to have a national organization that you belong to kind of help you orientate yourself and give you a feeling of authentication. Now, if you look, for example, MCA had one year 17,000 people for an Eid prayer. They're not really in need of a national organization. The national organization is in need of their money. And I'm saying that, and with all respect, that you're finding communities are serving themselves now. So they have their own doctors, they have their own counselors, they have their own youth organizations. So that absence. So what we try to do, and to get to your questions, we're meeting people who are like middle-aged, who have kind of converted again, is to find people that we know within the areas that they live, who they can meet up with. For example, Imam Majid in the Adams Center in the DC area is a good example. Sister Zainab Ansari in Atlanta, very, very amazing sister that we try to get them in touch with. Sister Heather, as a sister, the wife of Dr. Sherman Jackson, someone that we try to get them in touch with. Finding someone locally that can ultimately mentor them and take care of them. Thirdly, what we try to do is get them part of the blog. So actually a lot of writers on our website were people who stumbled across the website and kind of started redeveloping a relationship with God on their own terms and with Islam on their own terms. And some of them coming and say, look, man, Suhaib, I still smoke weed, man. I said, look, just do your best. Try to stop. And I know. He's like, I know, it's haram. Don't say it. But ultimately coming out of that through his or her own development is something that we found has a much more profound impact than me going and saying, Azhar University says smoking weed is haram. Sheikh Ali Juma says smoking weed is haram. No, ultimately coming to his own conclusions or her own conclusions was very important. So, number one, the absence of really needing national organizations, whereas local communities are very strong. So directing people to those local communities. Number two, getting people involved, actually, in their own spirituality, expressing themselves and feeling confident in themselves, also very important.
Thank you very much for your enlightening talk. I'm wondering on a practical level, and it may relate to my age, who stumbles across your website? What is the pathway? Because we know how many jihadist sites are. We're always told that in every conference, but we're not told about the more synthesis you're mentioning, the translation. How do you get there?
That's a very good question. She asked, how do you know or how do you draw people to your website? Initially, we didn't really know how to do that. So I learned a trick with Google, God bless Google, and that is that if you put a word like porn or murder or terrorism or jihadist, you get a lot of hits. I mean, honestly. Hey, no one, that's my trick, so don't use that for your own blogs. But we really attracted people who were frustrated with that translation process and with that synthesis process, and who kind of said, for example, we translated an article by a scholar about Independence Day. I mean, all across the Muslim world, I was a convert. I was told the first week, all your holidays are forbidden. So I go home to my mom, it's Mother's Day, and, you got to go to church on Sunday with Mom, and she's got her hat on, and it's Oklahoma, and I'm like, haram. And, yeah, you can imagine the continental divide that was created in my house. And then I go to the Muslim world, and they're celebrating everything. I mean, they have, in Egypt, because of the pharaonic times, they have like holidays every week in Egypt, right? And then going to scholars and saying, like, what are you celebrating these holidays for? And they were like, what, you don't celebrate? I was like, everything. I was told birthdays and Mother's Day. So we started to kind of sift through classical Muslim tradition, because you have to do that in order to keep yourself authenticated with the community, in all honesty. You can be a rebellion. I think the progressive Muslim movement is an excellent example of that. A movement who I certainly don't agree with a lot of what they had to say, but I do agree with a lot of what they had to say as well. Like, for example, I think those walls should be torn down in the back of mosques. Prophet didn't have a wall. But if I were to say that in my own community, and I did it once, and the biggest backlash was from women, not from men. In fact, the sister came to me and said, you're a sellout. You went to Azhar and you got that red hat. It's over with. I said, look, the Berlin Wall was torn down. We can't turn down a wall. My daughter, when I punish my daughter, what do I make her look at? I put her on the wall. So now she's in a mosque, listen to a speech about, she just went to the MSA where everyone was sitting together, and Sheikh Jamal Badi was talking about how Islam, liberated women. But when she goes to the mosque, how's the wall? You like the new wallpaper? Right? But we'll get some cameras. And I was in one community where they were so uncomfortable even with the camera that they thought their wife was going to look at the khatib and get all hot about it. Yeah, honestly. That they ordered the cameras to be removed now because we're not comfortable with who we are. So we dealt with that frustration. And you mentioned one of our brilliant scholar, he's a Hanbali jurist from Kuwait. He's from Oklahoma. He converted. His name is Abu Majid. He wrote an article about the khutbah in English, which was in the USA Today. They ran some stuff on it as well as the Washington Post. But the amount of responses we got from people, they were just like, yeah, my whole life, I wanted to hear a speech in English on Friday. And I never could. And I lost my religion because that was the only time I go to the mosque. And I one time attended a mosque, and I also happened to Sheikh Hamza, where they ordered me to give the speech in Arabic. So I said, I'm just going to do it. I just want to see what happens. I want to live through, I want to be a Hanafi for a minute. So, but not from Turkey. So I gave the speech in Arabic, at first in English. Nobody was in the mosque. It was me and the cockroaches. But then when I started to speak in Arabic, the 3-minute speech, the masjid was crowded. They didn't understand one word. I could have been telling the recipe for baba ganoush. And they would have said, Ameen. Allahumma zidna zaytan, Allahumma zidna batikhan. They'd have been, Ameen. So we ran into people through kind of the topics that we dealt with. The issue of synthesis, the issue of translation. Presenting, we have a series on American Muslims who are involved, and that's where I met Zeba and others, who are just living their lives, man. I think she asked you the question in the interview, are you a representative for Muslim women? You're like, no, this is what I do. This is how I live my daily life. Finding other people would say, you know what, I do that too. That's what I do. I didn't do it to be, like the next Rabia Adawiyya. This is what I love to do as a person. So we ran into people really through topics that we chose, especially those topics about language, issues of worship, issues of honestly, more liberal positions that had to be taken legally from the point of ritual law. We seem to attract a larger audience. From those who agree and then those who really let us have it.
Sister Samina and Amina.
alaikum. Thank you so very much for just making yourself a human person by saying that you will make mistakes. I think part of the problem, the community has problem going to the scholars and imams is because they believe that they are perfect, so if they go with their imperfections, they're going to be judged. So that's, something. And I would love to know what is that I, as an individual, could do for the converted Muslims, because it breaks my heart to see what it is that they're feeling, the loneliness and all that.
That also goes back to the question that she asked too. You need to befriend people, first of all. You have to be, you cannot go to someone and feel that you have to change their life religiously and then somehow feel that you've authenticated yourself doing that. I think there was 2 days ago, there was an article that came out that people who spend more time chatting and like posting on Facebook and Twitter are like much more prone to be unhappy than people who sit and have meaningful conversations with their spouse, for example. Yeah. I mean, duh. I mean, unfortunately, our tax dollars are spent to come to that conclusion. So you have to develop a meaningful relationship with people, man. And they have to feel that you love them, that you care about them. And that's very simple. I mean, it's like in Oklahoma, we have mashed potatoes. That's considered like comfort food, If someone comes over, you want to make them happy, mashed potatoes, man. It's like dal and curry, I guess, for you. So getting to have that comfort feeling with people is extremely important, Auntie. You cannot just say, like a number of our convert sisters tell me, and even sisters who convert who are already Muslim, right? I mean, they come back to their religion, that the first thing that someone gave me was a hijab. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I have a lot, but this one is probably up there, the top 5. And you talk about interfaith, this is the story. A Korean lady comes to me in Santa Clara, calls me and says, I need to see you, no one can be there. It's like, wow, what's going on? I mean, it's kind of a strange request. Because I, might end up on like, Fox News or something, a video in the purse. So she comes to me and she says, Imam, I'm a Sunday school teacher. I grew up in Sunday school, so not Muslim Sunday school. No, I'm talking about the felt with the disciples, and then the tuna sandwiches and the Kool-Aid, the VBS. So that Sunday school. I was like, so you're a Christian Sunday school teacher? She was like, I'm Muslim. So I was like, wait a minute. You're a Muslim? You're teaching Sunday school and she's like, this huge church. I can't say the name. I won't get in trouble. So I was like, how? Like, how'd that happen? She's like, I just converted to Islam and I'm like spiritually torn. I don't know what to do. And I love these kids. I've been teaching them for like 10 years. And I'm just sticking to the 10 Commandments because I know that Islam and the 10 Commandments go together. And I don't want to disrespect them. And I was like, wow. She's like, and if I quit the church, there could be some ramifications I can't mention here because we're being filmed. So I told her, keep teaching. But, eventually you're going to have to admit theologically that you have to make some decisions. But at this moment in time, you can't. So she was like, she almost bowled over. And she's like, I really don't want to. I'm not teaching anything that goes against their religion, and I'm not teaching anything that goes against our religion, but I'm just really in a very difficult situation. So that's a woman that needs a mentor in the community. She needs someone to come and hug her and say, hey, it's all right, baby. You're going to be okay. And I had once a sister that came to me who, serious family problems, and I had to go find a woman to hug her. So, no, it was cool. So, I can't hug her. In Islam, we have certain, rules and regulations that we respect. I metaphorically and emotionally hugged her for sure. I would have probably suffocated because she was kind of small. So I went and found a woman and I said, would you mind just being like a huggy buddy for this girl. And she was like, sure. So she just came and hugged her, and I talked to her, she was crying. And then a year later, the hugger, okay, not the hugged, the ismu fa'il, came to me and said to me, you know, we're the best friends, man, because we trusted each other after that moment. So you're going to deal with converts. Number one, it's not going to be romantic. They're going to have problems. You're going to have problems, cultural issues. But you just got to be committed to cultivating friendship, man. And I believe in communities, in the Muslim communities, we need to take the prophetic model of budding people up, man. MSAs can do that. In Medina, what did the Prophet do? He took people who didn't know each other and said, you guys are going to be brothers for a while. You guys are going to be sisters for a while. Getting to know each other, man, and feeling relaxed with each other is extremely important. So investing in that relationship first and foremost.
Sister Samina, you're being humble. You have an entire conference that's coming up from fear to friendship. So it's we'll announce it again as well. But Sister Amina, please.
Assalamualaikum. For all of your insight. I also like to invite you to the Lighthouse Mosques, which is run by converts. So there are converts, like Imam Sahib Web cycling every month. So things are beginning to change. But, I actually have 10 questions, but I'm only going to do 2. I know we have to go home. We talked about strictness that Muslims have with each other and kind of pure political attitude. But you also see the other extreme where it's like, have it your way. I think that was your expression, have it your way Islam, where you don't ever want to say anything to anybody because you might offend them or you might, not apply. But how do you kind of balance that out? And then the second question I have is, anytime I go on an article about Islam or Muslims, I always go to the end of the article and look at the comments, and I usually feel kind of sick by the end of it, so I kind of limit it. It just seems like, the internet brings out the worst in people, or there's just people who spend their life, they're the same people maybe writing these really nasty comments. So, what is your perspective on that, A, and B, are you the recipient of that? I mean, either a lot of them are from the neocons, as well as the how much of that do you experience?
The first question? I just came from Cairo, don't forget, so I'm like.
How do you balance between not being judgmental, but also not?
Well, yeah, I think we have to respond to that with the usul. And the usul are the foundations of our religion or orthodoxy. Does that mean that we treat people who are not orthodox as not being Muslim? No. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, who unfortunately many times is misrepresented as this kind of intolerant, harsh, unfortunately that's due to a number of reasons that a lot of his books that were brought out, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote without putting any spaces between words. He wrote so fast. So his Arabic writing is like a line. And there was a person that was in charge of actually rewriting what he wrote in his lifetime. So you have, for example, the collection Majmu' Fatawa of Ibn Taymiyyah, where even the topical headings are mistranslated back into Arabic. So for example, you have the chapter on Genghis Khan and the Tartars, where it says, so they translate as Kana'is wal Mushrikeen. They translate it as churches and the polytheists, where actually it's Genghis Khan and the Tartars. That's how off the guy was who was trying to read the Arabic was. And then you read this really harsh language, like, wow, I'm not bringing him to an interfaith club. I mean, Ibn Taymiyyah is. But he was talking about people who were invading and killing his people, not Kana'is and Genghis Khan. Ibn Taymiyyah said something interesting about the Khawarij, who were kind of the first extremist movement within the Muslim world, who considered, the mass majority of Muslims as infidels and actually declared their blood permissible, even killing some of the Prophet's companions and their wives. He said, even though they were definitely not orthodox, when they died, we buried them as Muslims, we prayed upon them as Muslims, and we distributed their wealth as Muslims. We can invert that into our community. Number one, we don't have the literacy that Muslims had many years ago, in the sense of, even in the Muslim world, a societal literacy where, for example, even now if you go to Mauritania, because of the language, kids are still poets. They can just rattle off lines of poetry, Arabic poetry, without even thinking about it. Where in most of the Arab world now, you don't have that. People are struggling even with basic sentence structure because of slang that's that spread in the Arab language. So what do we say about American Muslims who are far away from really living, quote unquote, in a society where scholars are everywhere and you have this rich intellectual tradition within Muslim communities, not in academia? We cannot expect them to be at the same level of those Muslims that we're reading about in classical texts, just because of the absence of that connection and the reality of living in a completely different world. So we have to respect orthodoxy, and I think in order to keep ourselves safe, I will say that as someone who's trained, but at the same time, we're gonna have to give people room to make mistakes. We can criticize, we cannot be utopic, in our democratic understanding of Islam, so to speak. We're gonna have to be critical, but let's be critical with ethics. Let's be critical in a way that we're not, threatening people physically. So that gets into some email. I mean, I've received emails from some militant Sufis when I agreed to teach for Al-Maghrib Institute. Oh, wow. I got, may Allah guide you. You have destroyed the ummah. Things like this where just very violent, harsh messages. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen a trend amongst the Salafis or the Sufis, but what I've seen a trend is from people who are arrogant because of self-righteousness, irregardless of their orientation, irregardless of being Sufi, Salafi. The jihadists, I haven't had a lot of interaction with, just a few questions here and there, or even having given a speech somewhere and then receiving like an anonymous message, but nothing personally threatening, no. But I will say something, that we are going to have to change our understanding of Sufism to deal with the West. And when I'm saying that, or the modern world, the idea of being alone in front of a computer is really one of the most important pivotal moments in the life of a person to prove if they're God conscious. Nobody sees me now. So instead of projecting Sufism or Ihsan to some type of romanticized historic guru who flew on a rug or something, as Sheikh Uthman Danfodio talked about, your Sufism or your Ihsan with God is when you're in front of that computer and you're talking bad about somebody or threatening somebody or bullying somebody. Because you don't feel responsible. You're able to type whatever you want. As you said, there was a time, actually, this is one of my teachers I'm talking to here. There was a time where we stopped comments on our website. Because it would just, Somebody came to me and said, I'm not reading there because of the comments. I was like, well, don't read the comments. Like, no, I have to go to the bottom and have to. I was like, that's your fault, not my fault. But actually, we stopped the comments for like about 2 or 3 months. And then we started again, and people were like, okay, we promise, like, we got the idea, and But really, spirituality now has to be redefined within, in the framework of what we are living now. And that computer is one of the biggest tests of taqwa. As the Prophet said, to worship God as though you see him, even though you can't see him, but you should know at least he sees you. So if you're typing on the computer and you're being harsh or rude or talking about someone in a bad way, man, where's your God consciousness? When the Prophet told us very clearly, whoever believes in God in the last day, speak well or shut his mouth or her mouth. It's not, and he linked that with belief in God and belief in the last day will come out in that character, that behavior.
I think that's a great way to end the program. I want to just, if you can join me in thanking Imam Sahib Web again.